Well, welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name's Mark Powell, and my guest with me today is Mr. Vince Williamson. Welcome, Vince.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. Vince, you've written a book called Coming Home, which I know is a very intimate personal life story. But I wonder if we could start by, before we get to the contents of the book itself, what's your fondest childhood memory?
Well, I think catching my first fish with my dad when I was probably about 5 years old. We'd gone on a fishing holiday. I knew nothing about fishing, out in a little boat in a place called Mandurah in Western Australia. And Dad was very, very patient with me. I didn't sort of catch on too well. He was pulling in fish, I was getting nothing. And after about the third day, just about getting ready to pack up, I suddenly felt a tug on my line and pulled in this beautiful fish. And it was such a joy. And, Dad was overwhelmed by the fact that I'd caught my first fish. Anyway, I related this to him some years back, or after the event. And he told me what really happened, that he'd actually, in desperation, got one of his fish and hooked it onto my line when I wasn't looking and threw it overboard and gave it a tug. And you would have thought that even at that age, I would have realised that you don't often catch a fish that's already been scaled and gutted. But that was just really the epitome of my dad. He was just a really caring, wonderful guy, and really was my role model in those early years. So that's my favourite childhood memory. But probably at the time, you don't think too much about your life. It just happens. But when I look back on it, I think the lessons that my dad gave me, or the role model that he was, in the way that he loved his family and how deeply he loved his wife, and I think that just set a pattern in me, and I value that enormously because quite often I see something very, very different in the lives of or family life.
Now, obviously, fatherhood and fathers have a particular influence on young men growing up, particularly as Christians. But your dad wasn't a Christian. And you yourself, I guess in the process of becoming a good father or trying to be a good father, came to faith yourself in Christ. Can you explain, how did that come about?
Well, I actually, with my parents' encouragement, joined the church, which was just across the road from our house, primarily to be in the basketball team. But I quite enjoyed the experience and the stories. But my mum and dad had actually turned their back on Christianity when their marriage was actually interrupted by the church, because my mum was a Catholic, Dad was just a farm boy, had no religion, and they weren't going to sanction their marriage. And so they really both walked away from the church. But they did encourage my younger brother and I to go to church, and I can clearly remember being excited about a Christmas display that we were doing, where we'd been training for weeks, and I was able to talk Mum and Dad into coming. And I was thrilled to see them come. But during our performance, it was pretty obvious that Dad would have rather have been somewhere else. And that had an impact on me, because if Dad didn't want to be there, well, I'm thinking, what on earth am I doing here? And so I basically walked away from the church. Dad had that influence on me. But I think also, Dad missed out on a lot because he'd closed his mind to Christianity.
Okay, so what happened from there? You walk away from the church. Give us a summary then of what happened the next 20 years.
Well, probably the biggest thing that happened was that I met a wonderful girl, but I was also called into national service, and we were only married for a month before I went to the other side of Australia, which was pretty tough. I was a machine gunner. I didn't want to be there. I didn't particularly want to go to Vietnam, but I knew that if I was going to get through this next 2 years, that I really needed to put my head down and work hard. I was invited to go to Portsea to train as an officer, but I certainly didn't have my heart or mind in wanting to make a career in the army. And so I just focused on doing the best job that I could for the 2 years I was there. Particularly hard for my wife. She followed me to Brisbane. Very, very lonely time for her. And we were just thrilled for the times that we could get together, which was probably one weekend in every month. I think when I totaled it, we only saw one another for about 6 weeks in that 2 years of our married life.
Wow.
She, seeing it looked like I was going to Vietnam, she wanted us to start a family. And so we're only just 21, and we had our little daughter, which was just a life-changing thing. And remarkably, the first thing I really wanted to do when I first looked at this little baby was actually go to church. And we did.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, I think, we were in a strange place for a start. We were away from family. We had no one. There was no family support. And just the delight in having this little girl. I wanted to go somewhere. I wanted to show her off, I think, or maybe just wanted to, the feeling was I wanted to say thanks. And so I had this sense of just thankfulness that we were together and we were able to enjoy together starting a family. And that was just delightful.
So at that point, you've got your first child, a daughter. You go to church. You're full of thankfulness to God. I guess you could say you haven't abandoned belief in God, but He's not the King. He's not the Lord of your life, and you're definitely not trusting in Christ as your Saviour. What brought you to that point?
Well, really, again, it's family. We moved from Western Australia to this side of Australia. Me pursuing fame and fortune, wanting to build a business, wanting to actually be a great provider for my family. And in the process of doing that, I really got caught up in the whole scene of work, of really wanting to be able to be a great provider. And really, the family started to become second. And it had a big impact on my relationship with both my wife and my kids. And it struck me like a bit of 4B2 that really I'd failed them. Yes, I'd been a good provider, but I hadn't really provided what they really needed, which was good leadership. They recognised that work was more important to me than what they were. That did have a big impact, and I write about that in the book, how that had a tremendously devastating effect on my wife in particular. She was the one. You were saying I still had a trust and faith in God because I went to church on that day with the baby, but really, no, it was all about me. I didn't really have any faith. In fact, I used to say to the kids as they were growing up, you need to learn to be the master of your own destiny. And so I put all my faith in the work that I could do to be as cunning as possible, to be even manipulative where it needed to happen. And it had a terrible effect on her.
Yeah, in fact, I think you used to say to your children, correct me if I'm wrong, that, religion, Christianity in particular, it's a crutch. Don't have anything to do with it. Crutch for the weak.
Crutch for weak people, yeah. Yep.
But there was a turning point because I know, well, I know your children. One of them, whom is a Presbyterian minister in Tasmania, and he said there was a key moment where you actually brought the whole family together.
Yeah.
And well, you tell us what happened next.
Well, I'll try and make it a short story, but my wife, during this really down time, decided that she wanted to go back to church.
Okay.
And I felt that I needed to take up a sense of leadership here and stop her from going, because I didn't want her getting caught up in with any crazy Christians, and so I went along. But I really went along to just try and convince her that whatever problems we were having, the answers weren't in. We wouldn't find them in Christianity. We wouldn't find them in the church.
Okay.
But she was determined, and I think she probably. I think I could sense that there would be a separation in our relationship if I didn't respect what she was wanting to do. So I started to go along to church. And
what church was this?
This was a wonderful little church. It was an Anglican church, St. Stephen's in Lugano.
Okay.
With the most wonderful minister, the Reverend Donald Howard, who I would say would be the man that's had the most impact in my life. And the reason was he just preached the gospel, and I was hearing things that I had never heard before. And
like what, Vince?
Sorry?
Like what? When you say you've never heard these things before,
well,
what was it that you were hearing?
I'd certainly had contact with churches and ministers, but it had all been very soft and gentle and soapy, basically, and I didn't see strength. What I saw with this man was that he was standing on something that was very, very attractive. His life was built around something very, very attractive. For me, I was like a reed blowing in the wind. Whatever sounded like a good idea, I was all over it. He was a solid man, and not a man that had an easy life. He'd been, I think, a jackaroo. He'd been an editor of a newspaper out in the bush somewhere. He'd lost his wife to cancer when she was probably, I'd say, late 30s.
Wow.
He'd gone through a pretty tough time, and yet his faith was unwavering. If anything was going to test somebody, what he'd been through would have tested them. And so I found him incredibly appealing. And rather than what had happened in the past, where we'd been approached by ministers to come to various things, I started chasing him. I wanted to know. I wanted to understand what it was that made him who he was. And in fact, I think I was probably trying to convert him to atheism because I couldn't, I just couldn't get it together. I couldn't work out why he was so strong. And but in the process, I came to the Lord, and he gave me a book. He gave me a little book called More Than a Carpenter. And because I'd said to him, he challenged me one day. He said, look, what would it take for you to believe in Jesus? And I said, look, Donald, Jesus would have to walk in through that door and prove to me who he was before I could possibly believe. And so he gave me this little book, and he said, look, you might find someone just like you. And I think he's probably talking about Josh McDowell, the writer of that book, who was a non-believer. But what I found in that book was a man named Thomas, who basically said the same thing to Jesus. I won't believe it till I see the holes in his hand and the spear hole in his side. And as I read that little book, I could see Jesus through Thomas's eyes. And I'm a pretty slow reader. I finished the book at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's a little prayer at the end of the book, which I prayed. I prayed it a dozen times just to try and get my head around what it was I was praying. Beautiful little prayer. And then I snuck up to bed hoping not to wake anyone. Our kids at that stage were late adolescents. I'm going to say 18, 20, 22.
Oh, wow.
So not little kids.
But Saul's still living at home.
Saul's all still living at home. And anyway, I snuck into bed trying to not to wake my wife. And she'd been lying there praying for me. She knew something was happening.
Wow.
A very significant moment, a life-changing moment in both our lives. And the incident you referred to the next morning, because I'm thinking, what am I going to say to my kids?
Yeah.
They're going to think that I'm some sort of a flip-flop after all the things I'd said about forget about God, forget about church. It's for weak people to say to them that I was wrong. And I was afraid that I would actually drive them away. I'd drive them further away.
Drive them further away from...
Well, from me, because all of a sudden, rather than trying to be the big hero in the family and the breadwinner and winning lots of battles out there in the business world and all that sort of stuff, suddenly I'm saying I've been on my knees and I've prayed. I've prayed to God. And I just said to them, look, I don't know too much about it at this stage, but I intend to find out a lot more.
And you apologised to them, didn't you?
I did, yes. I apologised to them because I could see that the life choices that they were making were damaging, and I really didn't have the tools to help them. I had no absolutes in my life, and so I couldn't say to them anything as an absolute. You shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, and give them a good reason why. And so there was a certain desperation, which I'm sure God had recognised my Achilles heel, which was my family, always had been my family, and I'm sure that He recognised that, and He brought me to His knees.
Yeah, in fact, in your book, Coming Home, there's a really poignant incident with your son, I think Peter, where you're fishing together. Interesting sort of bookend to your life and his. You know, we started by talking about you fishing with your dad, being one of your fondest childhood memories. Why was that time with Peter such a significant event, do you think?
Well, this is going back a few years. So this is going back to when he was about 16, and I'm so caught up in my business. I'm just so overwhelmed by the challenges. I had about 60 staff. We were going through a recession. Things were tight, tough, and I'm just working harder and harder. And anyway, Pete, I could see was really struggling, and I don't think that I had got close enough to him to know what it was that he was struggling with. So I suggested at the end of year 12 that he and I take some time and go fishing. He is a great trout fisherman, in fact.
Right.
He is he's Peter the fisherman. He's wonderful. In fact, he's in Tasmania, and yet I don't think he's been trout fishing.
It's crazy.
I know. I'm sure a time will come when he'll get the right.
But he's a fisher of men now. So
he's a fisher of men, he is.
More important.
Anyway, I knew that he really didn't want to come fishing with me. He wanted to go fishing, but not really with me. And so it was a pretty tough few days, the first few days, just trying to work out how this was all going to work together. We'd done a fair bit of fly fishing and with some success, but then we decided we'd have a quieter day out on Lake Yukonbean trolling in a little inflatable dinghy. And we're just sitting there in silence, sun's beating down, and I'm trying to create some conversation with Pete. And I said, gee, your granddad would have loved to have been here, which was impossible because he died about 10 years before that. And Pete asked me a question which just absolutely floored me. He said, how did you feel at the funeral? And again, I think I'd been so busy. I was 33 when my dad died. He died at a pretty young age, and it really floored us. But I don't think I'd ever truly and deeply mourned. And my thoughts went back to that funeral, and I just started to weep. And you're trying to build a relationship with your son. He's sitting, 3 feet away from you, and every time I tried to answer him, I would just cry. And so I just felt totally humiliated, weak, pathetic. But then fortunately he caught a fish. And so that turned the attention away from me.
And not one that you'd put on the line.
Not one I put. Never had to do that for him. He was very, very competent. But through my tears and my panic, as I tried to net the fish, I actually got the hooks stuck in my hand.
Right.
Which was incredibly painful with a trout flopping around.
Yeah.
Anyway, I knew that you couldn't really successfully cut hooks out of a hand. You had to actually just wrench them out. And so we went to the shore. We were miles from anywhere. There was no hospital anywhere close by. So I asked Pete to pull them out with the pliers, which he then became very upset. He didn't want to do that. He knew it was going to be pretty gruesome. And I just said to him, mate, just make sure you get it out first time. And he just actually screamed and hanging onto the pliers, wrenched them out. They came out clean as a whistle, but the pliers and the hooks finished up about 30 metres up the shore. But I think that moment sort of broke the ice between he and I. The whole day, he saw what he thought was probably a man able to handle most things, weeping in grief. He saw, in fact, it was quite a good outcome to show that I actually had some courage to have these things ripped out of my hand.
But that also you were weak and needed help.
I needed his help, yep, absolutely. So it changed our relationship. Obviously, no God in any of that. Well, probably God was there behind the scenes smiling, but our relationship did change. There was a greater openness that occurred.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about your book is vulnerability. And as men, we try to be, tough, masters of our own destiny.
Yeah.
And yet it's in the gospel that we're the most vulnerable, isn't it? That we're humbled, we come to Christ empty-handed, needing him to save us. But I'm just looking at the cover, and I know this cover is special to you. It's ironically a cover of an old sandstone, I guess, disused church. Why is that so meaningful to you?
Well, again, this is going back even further when the kids were probably, I'm going to say 10, 11, 12, around that age. We used to go down skiing every weekend. My business was a company called Safari Campers. I used to manufacture motorhomes and campers. So we had the ideal vehicle to go skiing. And if the skiing conditions look good, pack the kids into the vehicle and go. And I think it's out of Collector, just past Goulburn. We used to drive past this little church, and it just caught my eye. And I found myself thinking about it, obviously abandoned, but I guess I was thinking about what it might have been like in its heyday. People lovingly putting stone on stone and building this beautiful little church, and now it's empty. So one day when we were driving back from the snow, I stopped the combi and climbed out and climbed the fence, and I went and took some photos. And in fact, my son Michael came with me to take the photos. And it was just a reminder, I think. It was just a reminder that church had been something that was important to me. And he remembers that day. In fact, the little church is called St. Michael's, but it's been abandoned for many, many years.
But do you think it was like God really sort of reminding you that I'm there, even though...
When I look back, I would say that's certainly the case. That thought didn't cross my mind at the time.
Yeah.
But there were just so many things that have happened in our life that there were those little reminders.
So one of the things that's really powerful in your book is it's really talking about fatherhood. It's talking about brokenness, vulnerability, coming to God as our Saviour, following Him as our Lord. But there's also a powerful challenge in here about parenting, because all three of your children are now believers. In fact, your two sons are ministers, one in the Presbyterian Church, one in the Anglican Church, and your daughter is married to an Anglican minister. Yeah. So you've got the trifecta there.
Yep.
And she herself, is, heavily involved in ministry.
Yeah.
What encouragement, advice would you be giving to parents, especially as they might see themselves in the same sort of season as you once were, where children are going astray, or maybe they're even before that age, they're at that still formative stage of developing. What words of encouragement or advice would you give to young parents?
Well, it's engagement with your children. My dad was not an ambitious man, but he was a family man. And I'm sure that was became part of my DNA just from seeing the way that he operated. I had made so many mistakes with the kids, and yet I knew that everything that I was trying to achieve was really second rate compared to how much I loved them, how much I needed them. There were a few incidents, a few that are in the book there that spell that out. Look, a lot of pressure is put on men, a lot of pressure to be a breadwinner, a lot of pressure to be, a leader, and I think that we're competing with a very, very loud world. There's not too many kids that are necessarily going to think of their dad as their role model. It might be a sports star or a singer. It could be anything or anyone. And access to social media is such that there's plenty of targets out there for them to model themselves on. I think fathers just need to be aware. Well, I know they have to be aware that the most important role in their life is to nurture and care for their family. If they do nothing else, it doesn't matter. Just nurture and care for them. And I know lots of guys in ministry whose kids have walked away from the Lord, and when I talk to them, when I talk to the kids, often it's because dad was just so involved in work and so involved and committed to the church that they became jealous of the church. The church was taking dad away. And so I think trying to get that balance right, which is so, so difficult. Yes, we need to be focused. We are leaders. We are breadwinners. We're role models. And we're either going to be good role models or bad role models. But kids are going to see us, they know us, they probably know us better than we know ourselves. Yeah. And if they don't like what they see, they're going to find someone else to model themselves on. But if you engage with them, if you understand their struggles, their problems, taking the kids away. I took Michael away for a week as well, which was a fabulous experience, bushwalking 100 kilometres, just depending upon one another. The conversations that we had during that hike, I'll never forget, and I'm sure he won't forget either.
Well, I know because Michael Williamson, the Anglican minister that we were talking about earlier, he does the same thing now with your grandkids, his children. In fact, he has a lovely model which I'm trying to implement too, where he reads through the entire Bible with his children, and then at the end of it, he takes them away on a trip. They can go anywhere. Yeah. Does he set a limit on the cost? Like, could it be France or?
I love what he does.
It's excellent.
Yeah, and I see it in all the kids.
Yeah.
I say kids. I mean, they're all in their 50s now.
Yeah.
But they're still our kids.
Yeah.
They always will be. But what I'm loving is seeing this next generation coming through.
Yeah.
And Mike was the director of Year 13. Mm-hmm. 4 of our grandkids have gone through that course.
It's incredible.
And another one's going through it now, so 5 are going through that.
Yeah.
So out of the 12 grandkids, and there's more, I'm sure, that will come through and be challenged to do that, want to do that. I just see the way that my kids have succeeded where I failed, where I failed as a parent in those early days. They are engaging with them, they are nurturing them, they are teaching them the Bible. These kids have a seed planted in them, a big seed, which my wife and I every single day pray for those grandkids, and they know they're prayed for, and we're praying for their kids and generations beyond.
Yeah. I've heard it once said that behind talking to your children about Christ and God's word, one of the best things that you can give to your children is a good marriage. Would you agree?
Oh, well, absolutely. Absolutely. We've been married for 55 years. It is, we still have so much fun. I think that I'm probably more in love with Brenda now than ever, because we have walked this journey, and it's been a tough journey in lots of ways, but we're just delighting in family. We're delighting in the blessings that God has given us, and keen to share those blessings and share the intimate knowledge that we've gained from the way our family has grown, coming from away from God, just a big black hole, to embracing Jesus.
Okay, so look, you said before your children are in their 50s, so that I'm just thinking where that puts you on the age scale. I guess you can just put up your feet now and, collect, as John Piper would say, shells and do the gardening, or is that what you're doing now, or is retirement an opportunity to serve the Lord?
It's a great opportunity. Yeah, I'm 76. If you you probably worked that out.
You don't look a day under 60, but anyway.
During retirement, I was asked to take on a role as a chaplain at a prison. It was a women's prison, and I think I was the first
male chaplain at a women's prison.
There'd been some issues at this particular place, and I must say I didn't really want to do it. And the great excuse I found was, well, look, I'll do it if my wife says it's okay, because I knew she would say no.
But she said yes.
She said yes. Yeah. It was the most rewarding thing, the most eye-opening experience. So? Because I'd really never seen that side of life. And there were people there in that prison who were born into families where there was abuse, and they just never had a chance. They were doomed from the time they were born, really, because of the lack of family or just the lack of cohesion and the amount of abuse. And it was heartbreaking to see these some of these really lovely young women and the way that they had been damaged, particularly by men, and I felt like I was one of the enemy. I wasn't even sure how they would respond to me.
Yeah, so how did they respond to you? Didn't they sort of see you, you represent everything that has been bad in my life?
Well, that's how I felt. In fact, I drove past the gate about 5 times before I had the courage to drive in there.
Right.
And I was very, very nervous. I'm not very good at remembering names. Most blokes aren't. Most blokes can remember when they meet someone, what they do, whether they're a doctor or whatever they might be, but we're hopeless with names. For some reason or other, and I can only put this down to God, he opened my mind to being able to remember there were 200 women there. There was probably only 100 or so that I had direct contact with that would regularly come and see me. And I could remember all their names.
Wow.
And they would often weep when I'd call them by name.
Wow.
They were just used to having either their surname or their number barked out at them. They were never shown any respect. And the little chapel service that I took over, with about 4 women coming to it, mainly for the the bickies and cup of tea. We finished up with standing room only.
Wow.
It was just, and we were doing Bible studies. I just saw such growth in those women, and the lessons that I was teaching them were the thief on the cross. I was teaching them about forgiveness and grace, the things that they just would not even think about. I mean, imagine.
But the same truths that Donald Howard had taught you all those years ago.
Exactly. And what a privilege to be able to open the door to those women. That was in retirement. As I said, I did it reluctantly, but I am so delighted that I had that opportunity and saw women come to the Lord through that time. These days, yes, I do a little bit of preaching at our church in Katoomba. We have a fair bit of informal ministry. The book mentions a ministry called Stop, Revive, Survive, which is a men's ministry that that I kicked off.
That was in consultation with the former Archbishop Peter Jensen, wasn't it?
No, that was that was actually Connect 09.
Okay.
So this was basically a men's ministry. So in my business, I had about 60 blokes, and when I was converted, I could see that a lot of these guys they had really no idea, had never set foot inside a church. So I started Christianity Explained at work, and that was that. And I did it during work hours, not at lunchtime or before work.
Yeah, right.
And that was a fruitful ministry, which then developed after I went to college. That developed into a ministry that I did at other churches, an informal outreach, but with a real solid challenge.
So you've had one final question, if I can, sort of to wrap this up, because I know we could talk for another hour. You've had a business that's been involved in camper vans and camping.
Yep.
You know, have you thought about any sort of ministry that might sort of marry, you know, that men's ministry, evangelism with camping and things like that?
Well, I certainly have, and I know you're asking this question because we've had this conversation.
Yeah, funny, we should say that.
But yes, we're going down to see Andrew at the Presbyterian Inland Mission, and they have a wonderful program, from what I can see, where they encourage grey nomads to minister to churches as they travel. Now, until I speak to him, I've got no idea what that entails. But I've got both hands up saying, look, if you can use us, please do. We would love to either give the minister a rest and preach a sermon, do a men's outreach, whatever they would like.
So that's called New Donetsk, isn't it?
New Donetsk.
And whereabouts is that located?
In the bush somewhere. It's between Wagga and West Wyalong.
Right.
I can't remember.
Right.
Artlethane or something like that.
Yeah.
So we're heading out there in our nice caravan to see Andrew and get the lowdown on all this.
Right. So any grey nomads out there, if you're watching or listening to this, New Donetsk, south of New South Wales, a great place to visit and call in. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Vince's book, Coming Home, you can get it here at Reformers Bookshop. It's, I think, relatively cheap, isn't it? Because you've self-published at this stage.
I really wrote it for our grandkids. I wanted our grandkids to know where their Christian heritage, how it began and what a struggle it was. I'd heard that my great-grandfather was a lay preacher in South Australia, but everyone in the family has died. I've got no idea. I'd love to know whether he was a guy that prayed for future generations.
Yeah, incredible.
I want our grandkids to know our struggles, how Jesus opened the door, and how our lives were changed, and that they are a result of God's work in their grandmothers and my life. And I want them to know that. And I want them to know that they are prayed for. And I want them to be able to say to their kids and to their grandkids and to their great-grandkids that this is where the door to your family was opened. And this is what it took, and this is how God has blessed us, and He's blessed us with you kids. And we just want you to share that gospel and live the life to the full that Jesus promises.
Amen. Excellent stuff. Thanks so much, Vince, for joining us. This has been another episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My guest today has been Mr. Vince Williamson. You can get a copy or purchase a copy of this book, Coming Home, here at Reformers Bookshop. I hope you've been blessed and encouraged by the interview today. Just another plug for the Presbyterian Inland Missions mission station called New Donetsk in southern New South Wales by the Victorian border. This has been Mark Powell, and for AP, thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next time.